Okay, tell me if this sounds like you. You're a sales hunter with literally hundreds of target accounts in your territory and no idea who in your patch is even in the market for your solution. You've pulled all the reports, built all the lists, and you've done a bunch of account research, but you're still in the dark about where to find your low-hanging fruit. And look, you could waste another quarter smiling and dialing, grinding through a cold list, and blasting out emails, or you could do what I do and get Leadfeeder. Leadfeeder identifies the companies that visit your company's website and tracks on-site activity so you can see which leads from your region are ready to buy right now. Leadfeeder has customizable notifications, lead scoring, routing, and it works seamlessly with your CRM system. Right now, Sales Players has got the hookup on an extended 21-day free trial offer, so be sure to use the link in the show notes to sign up. Oh, and you should probably forward that link over to your ops team so they can get Leadfeeder set up for your whole team. Stop burning time and resources on leads that don't convert and sign up for Leadfeeder. Welcome to Sales Players, the #1 podcast for top players in B2B sales.
Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out in the world of sales, this is the show for you.
We're all about bringing you fresh, actionable ideas to supercharge your rev gen game.
We dive deep into the mindset, habits, and tools used by top performers in the industry. Generate more leads, close more deals, and build wealth and financial security in B2B sales.
So if you're ready to level up, you've come to the right place. Join the conversation with other like-minded sales players and continue the discussion beyond the show.
Hit the subscribe button, tune into the Sales Players, and let's start winning together. Hey there, Sales Players. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing new sponsor, Lemlist. Whether you're closing deals or nurturing leads, Lemlist is your all-in-one platform for personalization outreach that converts. Picture this. You craft a killer email campaign in minutes using Lemlist's intuitive drag-and-drop editor. Want to stand out? Lemlist is here to help with advanced personalization that lets you dynamically insert custom images, videos, and even personalized landing pages based on your persona. With Lemlist Analytics, you'll know exactly who opened, clicked, and replied to your emails. Join thousands of sales professionals who trust Lemlist to supercharge their outreach efforts. Use the link in the show notes below and start your free trial today. Your personalized outreach just got a whole lot easier. Happy selling.
All right, we're live. Krysten, welcome to Sales Players.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great. Well, a good starting point for the conversation today is, I know you've got a lot of followers out there on social, but maybe it's been a while since you've reintroduced yourself to your fans, and we'd love to introduce you to our listeners. So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get started in B2B sales? I know you're in the SaaS space. Talk to us about that journey.
Yeah, so I had a very unusual path to sales and tech sales. I think almost everyone has an unusual path to sales. That's you talk to anyone and you realize there's no one way to get here. But I actually started after working as a history teacher and then running a family business, and then made my leap into tech from there. And just because I was always the one in both of those roles I followed startups. I always felt like there has to be an app for this. There has to be a way to do these things better and faster. And so translated that into a leap into tech, and gone on to be enterprise AE at multi-billion-dollar tech unicorn companies, Tableau, Outreach, Salesforce. And now I've kind of combined those two things, when I've learned about how to succeed in sales, and then my teaching career, because now I'm coaching salespeople. So this past year has been a pretty awesome seeing things come full circle.
Yeah.
And what history teacher, what was the business was the family business? What type of business was it, industry wise?
Yeah. So it was my dad, my parents each ran their own organization, but my dad owned an insurance agency and a niche market insurance agency. And so I grew up, my first job was there whenever I was like 14. I kind of grew up in the business. And then when I burned out after 3 years of teaching, which most teachers do, my dad was like, hey, we actually, this is great timing for us. Would you come back and run operations? Because our operations manager is tanking. And so because I knew the business backwards and forwards, went back and revamped his whole operation. And the plan was for me to take over and buy out the business. And then after running each individual division, what I learned was I don't want to run an insurance company or insurance agency. So I told them like, yeah, sorry, I'm not going to do that, which was terrifying because that was my whole like end game. Like that was my whole plan. But I think life is too short and days are too long to not enjoy what you do. And I did not enjoy it.
Amazing to learn to say no. But so was that really your first introduction to like some SaaS tools? Was the insurance realm like the very legacy, just like clunky?
Oh, yeah. There's no one has worse tech than the only industry that might have worse tech than banks and insurance companies is nonprofits.
Yeah.
But even some nonprofits are better at what banks and insurance companies have. I am not kidding you. I like have used DOS systems because there were some insurance companies that were like, this is how we run things. And so they would have to give you a manual, like, and how to like put stuff into DOS. I was like, this is crazy. I was like, what is the string with green letters? It was something.
So talk to us then about the transition from these careers into SaaS sales, and maybe what would be interesting, I think, for listeners too, because a lot of our fans tune in and they are teachers or they work in healthcare, hospitality, or insurance or finance. What are some of the things that you think you learned from those careers that might have set you up for success in B2B SaaS sales?
Yeah. Well, my dad always says no education is ever a waste, right? And whatever you learn in whatever career you've had is not a waste. And I talked to so many people who've talked about that they see teachers succeed in sales over and over and over. And I've been asked a couple of times why that is and had some chances to reflect on that. And I think it's because a couple of things. Number one, especially in middle school and high school, like it prepares you for dealing with a hostile audience, right? Like, no one cares less about what you have to say than middle schoolers and high schoolers. And so while execs may like quietly check Slack or whatever, like teenagers will full on fall asleep. So it's making your presentation or you're like, why do we have to listen to this? This is stupid. So, you learn and what you're trying to do as a teacher is make things interesting enough to someone who doesn't want to pay attention to you and also help them understand something they don't understand without making them feel dumb and while making it engaging for them to follow along. And that's really a lot of what we do in sales. And so it's really not that hard of a fit, but you have to be able, whether you're coming to sales from teaching or some other career, you have to be able to connect the dots for people. Like you have to make it make sense. And so whenever I made the leap into tech sales, I just knew at a cellular level that I had to be able to tell a story that made sense because I was not a traditional, there was nothing traditional about hiring me.
Right.
And so I targeted a company. It was actually a Vista-backed company, Vista Equity Partners, that sold to K-12 education. And so my in was like, I know your buyer. I know their vocabulary. I know what they care about. I know what they say in their meetings. I knew their buyer better than anyone there. And so I was like, and I've done sales. It's insurance sales, but I've done it. And so it's like, you can teach me the SaaS part of it, but like I can teach you some things that you don't understand about your buyer. And so that was part of it. And the students or coaching clients that I've had, if you have been their customer. So this guy he was looking to break into tech and he had a side business where he had sold shoes, like sneakers, like online forever. And I was like, we got him in front of Shopify. I was like, anything e-commerce, if you've been their customer, you already know and like and are in their space. It could be something you follow in your spare time. I had a coaching student that I placed helped her get a job in sales in like pharmaceutical sales. And it was because she had been a personal trainer. She was always interested in health and that sort of thing. It can be just something you've done as a hobby. But like you have to connect the dots as to why it makes sense for you to be in that role. You can't expect them to do another.
And
That actually sounds like go ahead.
Yeah. Krysten, talk to me about how, you've been in this industry for a long time and how did you find that company and start to go after them and be like, okay, I want to roll at this K through 12 EDU company, SaaS company? How did you find out those people and really go after them?
Yeah. So I was living in Kansas City at the time, and that's where they were based out of. And I had actually heard of them when they started up. And because I had just followed startups like recreationally, I was interested in it. And I was like, whoa, this is a great idea. And so I just kind of followed them. And then as I started to think about how I wanted to do it, I definitely targeted them because I mean, they were based out of where I was based out of. I mean, they were, and then for all those reasons. And then I targeted and started the guy who had been their VP of sales and was there as part of their exit to Vista. He was in the coaching business. He was coaching startups. And I was like, I'm going to pay you to coach me
There you go.
because like you've done what I want to do. And so like we did like an executive type coaching and like sales coaching. And then eventually this was before I was really trying to target that one company, but I just knew he had done what I wanted to do. And so eventually he made an introduction for me when they had an opening to their current VP of sales, right? So without that introduction, that probably wouldn't have happened. And so like, there's a reason people say your network is your net worth.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with 2 executive coaches and those I learned a lot from them, but their network alone opened so many doors for me. I think that's something that people don't necessarily understand about this business or getting into sales. Like if someone will coach you and they have an extensive network inside wherever you want to get into or whatever industry you want to sell into. And I targeted retired bank presidents for a while whenever I was selling to banks just to mentor me. Like find someone who has a network where you want to get into. It makes a huge difference.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's actually what's funny enough. You might not know this, but I call myself a recovering entrepreneur turned SaaS sales executive. I had a juice bar and smoothie bar. It was closed due to COVID. We went D2C, fully Shopify online, burned hundreds of thousands of dollars in ads online and through Shopify, but we were part of Shopify for startups. In my rep, I went to her and I was like, what do you suggest me to do? And she's like, you need to get in SaaS sales. And I was like, what the heck is SaaS sales? And she's like, that's Klaviyo, that's Bold, that's all these apps. You could actually go work for that company. And I Googled SaaS sales and guess who pulled up? It was Jesse. And so then I DM'd him. I was like, hey man, I need to get a job. And look where I'm sitting at today, you know?
Yeah.
And I work at Hyros, and Hyros is really an interesting place to work because Alex Becker I'm like very close to Alex Hermosi and all these like content, like huge Tony Robbins, all these people. I now work for a company that sells to these people on a daily basis. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You cannot underestimate the power of a network. It's awful.
Yeah. It's really crazy too, to kind of bridge together some of those worlds, because like you said, if you can just reach out and access, like you were going after bank presidents to try to open up that network, there's multiple networks that you can be part of. And I think this is something, if I could go back a few years, I'd tell my younger self, like, you don't have to be confined to just this very specific niche within SaaS sales. There are other opportunities out there if you just go and find the right people that are part of those. And that's why Chase's story, I think, is so interesting, because he was part of these entrepreneurship circles and he's now in the SaaS sales circles. And now you're getting into these like content marketing and influencer circles, which is just really interesting. So I love that you, Krysten, were super proactive in getting out there and just finding those opportunities. Another thing I want to just call out for listeners, which we talk about a lot, because we have a lot of folks that reach out to us that tune into the show and they want to know how they can find opportunities. And in a lot of cases, they're like us. They don't live in a coastal city. I'm in Phoenix. Chase is in Louisville, Kentucky. We're not in like the coastal Bay Area. We're not in New York City. I used to be in Austin. I'm not there anymore. But a lot of our fans are reaching out to us from places in the middle of the country, like Kansas City. And that's one of the first pieces of advice I give them is, who do you know locally that might help you get to where you want to go? Start there. It's just way too hard to boil the whole ocean of, if you're living in Kansas City, if you're living in Phoenix, Arizona, like me, and you're trying to network in New York City, it's going to be really hard. So if you're looking for your next role and you're looking for the next opportunity, like, who do you know locally
Yep.
in your town that you can meet for coffee with and help
Sure.
open up that network like you did with the folks in Kansas City.
Yeah. And any sort of, when you're trying to network your way into something, it's a sales process, right? And so like you have to target like you would anything else. So many times companies where many times companies have a presence or they have somebody who works remotely who lives in your area,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I guarantee you there's a Salesforce rep that lives there's multiple,
Yep.
right? Like I guarantee you there's somebody. So it's like, it's not that hard to find. And so, but you just have to be intentional about it. Like if I want to be in this industry, if I want to work for this company, who can I find that is adjacent to that either works there now or did work there? Put on your sales hat and go be a hunter, go find those people. And just like prospecting, you're going to have to reach out to 3 to 12 people before anybody says yes. So, don't stop at one. You're going to have to follow up, like all the things that you would do for a sales process, you're going to have to do when you're networking your way into somewhere.
And one quick hack that I found is like the universities. So we are like in the flyover. They call us the flyover tech zone, like here in Kentucky.
Yep.
And
Yep.
but there is VC money in
Yep.
Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, Lexington. And so I went to the University of Kentucky. They had a tech entrepreneurship group, and I've met so many business owners. I've met people that are wanting to buy tech that can just make introductions to investors, whatever. And those were all free events. They're like there are government dollars that are
Yep.
funding these things, and they're having events. And so I challenge people to go to the Capital Factory if you're in Austin, Texas, or go to some sort of VC
Yep.
fund. They have events, and just talk to somebody.
Oh, yeah. Everywhere. Like in Kansas City, there was like a startup incubator, and that's actually, I think like there was like the Coffin Center for Entrepreneurship. That's, I think, the company that I eventually ended up working for. I think they got grant through there. And you're right, they have events. And yeah, you just look for startup events in your area. And yeah, it's gonna take a while to find the right people, but you're gonna make a lot of introductions. You're gonna start connecting some dots. And yeah, I think it's a great call out. Like almost everywhere, if you live in a mid-sized city, no matter what it is going to have, there's some tech money there, right? And it may be it may be companies you've never heard of, but some of them can still be like pretty decent sized companies, right? And you can make a great living and work for a great company.
Yeah. So speaking of great companies, when we look at your profile, you've been at companies like Outreach, Tableau, User Gems, pretty hot, very well-known companies, especially in SaaS. What were some of the things you did to get on the radar, or at least get those on your radar? Like, how did you get plugged into some of those opportunities? I know we get that question a lot from our listeners is, hey, I want to join the next, Outreach or Tableau, like the next really hot technology. How did you do it? And what advice would you give someone who's looking for that opportunity?
Yeah. I think it's important to call out that apart from User Gems, when I joined when they were Series A, I joined those companies when they were either kind of at or past their like a tipping point, right? As far as like, so it wasn't like, I was some sort of unicorn whisperer where I was like, oh, well, I feel like this is gonna, like, and I think anybody who rides that ride from, pre-seed or A through, unicorn or exit or whatever, they'll tell you like a lot of it is just luck or timing. I don't feel like there is much of a secret. I mean, shoot, like VCs, they invest in hundreds, maybe thousands of companies before they have one that goes. So I don't think I think anybody who tells you like, here's the 6 criteria to, join a unicorn before it's a unicorn. That's a lie, but the ways that I got plugged in, just kind of like we talked about, like becoming like how I got to Tableau was, we always talk about being their customer. So whenever I was at the Vista back startup, we had 8 different SaaS products and Tableau was embedded in one of our solutions. I'd never heard of it before that, but I saw it there and I've always been a data person. And I looked at it and I like fell in love with it. I was like, oh my God, this is magic. How have I never seen this before? And I would get upset I mean, not visibly in a demo or anything, but whenever our customers like didn't understand what I was showing them, I would get so mad. I would talk to the product owner and I would make her like demo it to me so I could understand more about it. And the time they were going through a lot of changes, they were doing another exit, and she happened to just casually toss off. She's like, "You love this so much, like you maybe should work there." I'm like, maybe I should. I think,
Yeah.
and I just hadn't even thought of. I just didn't even. I wasn't even aware of it. So it's like, don't discount the fact that when you've been their customer, right? Like that's a very powerful story to tell. Companies love to hire people who have been their customer or have used their tech, right? And so I could tell that story. And then for outreach, it was very similar. I had used something similar to outreach. I had brought that into the Vista startup because they had no email tracking software. And I was working in this huge territory. And I was like, I have to know if people are opening my emails. And so I went out and personally paid for, with my money, it was Yesware, which is not super sophisticated, but it can tell you if people are opening your emails. And so, I paid for it like with my own money, and I kept track of the deals I opened and closed based on like using Yesware. And so whenever I left to go to Tableau, I handed that data to my directors and was like, I've been using this. It was responsible for like 43% of my pipeline, 28% of my closed one. You might want to roll out something similar. And then they brought on a full like sales engagement platform a year later.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd been considering it, but I mean, the data didn't hurt, right?
Right.
And so whenever I was targeting outreach, because I wanted to work there, I aligned. I knew I had read Manny Medina, their CEO. I had read his stuff on LinkedIn. I very much aligned with like him, like values wise and what they were trying to do. And I used outreach at Tableau, and I was utterly convinced of the value of it. And so I very specifically targeted them. You mentioned Dave. We were talking about before the show started, Dave Rubenstein. I targeted him, and because he was the one who was hiring. And so like anytime I think I had a Google alert for him for a while. Like anytime he was on a podcast, like I would be like right there and would be firing away questions or follow up with him afterwards. And so, I mean, I'm not intentional about targeting companies because they are a unicorn or because I think, or because they're large or whatever. What I'm interested in is probably something different than maybe other people are. I want to know, do I believe in what their thing is? And do I like the conversations that I'll have there? Like, do I like the buyer? Which is actually one of the big reasons I got out of the Vista startup that sold education, because whenever I started talking to those buyers, God bless them, it reminded me why I got out of education.
Yep.
Like I am a very entrepreneurial, like I'm not risk averse, and like that persona doesn't think in terms of ROI. They're very risk averse. They're very slow moving. And I was like, oh yeah, this is why we didn't like each other before. And like your buyer is like location in real estate. It is the most important thing, and you absolutely cannot change it. So if you don't like the location of a house, like you can't change that. You're gonna have to look for a different house. If you don't like the buyer of whatever you're selling, you can't change that. The only thing you can do is change into something where you like the conversation. And I think it's really important because you're gonna bring a different energy when you like the conversation.
Yeah.
The people who were the best sellers at Tableau like cared about data pipeline, and they wanted to talk about data lake, Kubernetes, and everything that I had to Google while I was working there. Right? Like I knew I wanted to talk to sales leaders and marketing leaders because I geek out on that stuff. I read about it and listen to stuff about it when no one's paying me to do it. I'm fascinated by it, and you just bring a different energy to those conversations. I tell people target what you're interested in, with the caveat that it should also be something that where you can make money, right? And like, but people are not single faceted.
No.
We're all interested in multiple things. So find something that you're interested in where you can also make money.
And making money is not a bad thing. And that is something that I want to call out of. I was an entrepreneur. I had a juice bar and smoothie bar, had a valet company. I really enjoy working for a tech company. It's weird. I get these paid vacations. I get weekends off. It's just the strangest thing
Healthcare.
ever. Yeah. Healthcare. It's like 401k. What is that?
Yeah, and I hate the term, and I hate the idea of you with like, oh, well, salespeople are coin operated. Well, first of all, that sounds like a vending machine or like one of those claw machines in like an arcade, right? Like coin operated. But like you said, making more money is never. It's not. That's like what we would call like surface level pain or like a surface level priority. Like, what do you want to do with that money? And people who want to make more money frequently have very like different and sometimes altruistic goals. Like people want to people want to take their kids on vacation so that they to places outside the U.S. so that they can travel and broaden their horizons. They want to be able to help their parents as they get older. They want to be able to give to nonprofits that they support. They want to be able to afford to go on sabbatical and like give themselves great experience. Like there are there's money can do a lot of good things, and yeah, absolutely. Like making money is not a bad thing. And um, there's a book, I think it's called The Art of Work, but he talks about the concept of a portfolio life, where he was saying like basically you hear like follow your passion or whatever. And he points out there's a lot of ways to do that. And so like a lot of I'm very like values driven. And at times that has coincided with a lot of the companies I've worked for, but also I've done things like I follow that passion like where I volunteer, right? Like
Wow.
full fulfillment doesn't have to come from the company that you work for. If it's enough to finance like the life that you want or to be able to give to causes that you support, like for me, that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to shift gears for a second here. We were talking about your P Club masterclass on multi-threading. So maybe before we get into some of the multi-threading stuff that you cover in the course and give us a like sneak peek on what that's about, talk to us about how you got into coaching. So obviously from this conversation, we can tell you're very entrepreneurial. You have sort of that inclination, just like we do, to have something else going, some other passion, and you like
Yep.
making money. So I'm guessing that's kind of how the coaching business started, but how did you get your first client? Did someone knock on your door and say, "Hey, Krysten, teach me about enterprise sales and selling," or did it start by we've had guests on that just accidentally got famous on LinkedIn, more or less, or like had an explosion in LinkedIn just from a
Yep.
couple of like viral posts. In
Yeah.
my case, and Chase referenced this earlier, but I coached Chase into getting into the industry. That came from the podcast where I just had a lot of the listeners reaching out asking for guidance. And so the coaching was more of a reactionary thing. Hey, I've got to justify the time investment here. So I guess I'm a coach now. But tell us your journey. Like, how did that start for you?
Yeah. So it started there were a couple of different, it's never just one thing, but I've been doing stuff on messing around, trying to figure LinkedIn out since like 2020, right? Late 2019, early 2020. And so it was very gradual at first. But like, as very slowly became more and more visible, people would reach out and be like, "Hey, I want to get into tech sales. I noticed you went from, being a teacher. Like, would you help me?" And there have been so many people that helped me that I can't ever pay them back, but I can pay it forward. And also what I didn't realize at the time was that really lit up the teaching part of me, because like what I love about teaching is I love seeing the light come on for people. Like when they suddenly get something. And it can be my 5-year-old when I take them to the zoo and they suddenly, they see a giraffe and they've never seen it before. Like I just love seeing the light come on for people. And so and the other thing is part of I was talking about this with Chris Orlob because he and I have a somewhat similar background, like a similar value in that, like I was the first person in my mom's family to graduate from college. And so like when you change the type of career that someone can, you change everything about what's possible for their life and for their family's life. Like I said, the kind of careers they can take, the kind of education they can help their kids get, the kind of help they can give their parents, like that's very personal, right? Like when you help someone in that way, like absolutely getting into tech changed my life. It changed my income. It changed everything. And so it just kind of started trickling in that way. And at first it was just purely like I wanted to help, right? Because people had helped.
What's going on, sales players? It's Jesse here, and I want to introduce you to a genuinely cool product that we just learned about called Evie AI. It is a LinkedIn AI content assistant that was built to enhance your LinkedIn presence, increase your exposure and productivity as a seller. You can create personas, generate ideas, generate comments, craft posts, and 10x your LinkedIn presence. We actually had Joe, the founder, on the show, and he was kind enough to put together a special offer for sales players. There is a link in the show notes with more details. Go check out Evie AI. That's EVY AI.
Me and I enjoyed it. And I always felt like, and I think it's Warren Buffett that says like smart people learn from their own mistakes, wise people learn from other people's mistakes. And I wanted to help them like not make my same mistake, right? Like shorten the learning curve. And then I just enjoyed writing on LinkedIn. And so I just kept doing more and more of it. And like you said, like kind of like accidentally famous on LinkedIn, like that's just kind of what happened. Like it just like all of a sudden things just kind of started taking off. And so, and then that enabled me to then, more people started reaching out. And so then I started charging a little bit, and then I started like charging more. And then I realized like I can do this full time. But yeah, it was not, it's certainly not like super planned. It wasn't like I had a 5-year plan where I'm like, well, this is how it's going to end up in 5 years. But I also knew at a cellular level that I would never be a sales manager because I already have children and also like I've seen their calendars. I don't want to sit on 8 hours of back-to-back Zoom calls, and I'm too much of a control freak. Like I want to control my own deals. I don't want to hope someone else controls their deals. So I'm like, well, I can't do that. So like I've always been an IC. I've always been a salesperson. And so I was like, well, I guess it's like strat sales, or like global accounts or that sort of thing, which I've done. But this I like much, much better.
I'm really glad there's voices like yours out there that are normalizing that path, because for many years, especially the early part of my SaaS selling career, it was always like, what's your plan to get into leadership in the next few years? And there was just always that voice.
Yep.
Even in some of the companies I was at, I would tell people honestly, I was like, I don't know that I want to be a leader. I want to just carry a bag, and I like the flexibility being an AE. I'm in charge of my destiny. I'm focused on a result, not on hours input. If I can get that result with less hours, like hopefully that's cool, because that's how it should be.
Yep.
And with management, it's a whole nother equation. Like you said, it's back-to-back calls, and you're kind of squished in the middle of the higher ups and the folks that report to you. But I had a manager once tell me to stretch reality on the performance review and say, my plan is to get into leadership. And I was like, that's not true, but I'll put it down if you're saying I need to do that in order to save face or whatever. So it's cool to have people like yourself. I know there's a handful of others now on LinkedIn that have talked about how management's just not the path for them, but rather being an individual contributor, and then ultimately a solopreneur, which it sounds like is the path you're on, is kind of doing some of that, both of those things. So it's cool to hear other options, and I'm glad that we're normalizing that, not just in this industry, but hopefully in all industries, that like it's okay to just want to be on the front lines doing your thing and selling your deals and not have to worry about managing people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that managing people, what is it? Like Oscar Wilde or something says like hell is other people. I don't want to manage other people, right? I'm a very internally motivated person. And if I had a team of reps, which most likely you don't hire when you're become a first time manager, you didn't hire those people. You didn't choose them. So like you can't fix someone who's not internally motivated. That's like pulling teeth. I was like, nah. And I want to take issue with something about what you said though, about like, I don't want to get into leadership. You didn't want to get into management.
That's good.
Very different than being in leadership. Like Scott Ingram, who has like the Sales Success Stories podcast, which comprised half of my early like tech sales education. He's an individual contributor, and he talks about leading from the field. Yeah. And I was like, that's what I do. Like I should, I like go hunt down best practices, and then I go to help my team. Yeah. And as many people as possible do them. Like I am a leader. I'm just not a coach.
I'm not a middle manager. Yeah, that's a really good nuance, and I'm glad you called
Wow.
that out, because
Okay.
that's what I mean too. Is look, I do like leadership. I wouldn't have started a podcast about sales if I didn't want to be some kind of a thought leader on the subject. But yeah, to your
Lots of
point,
ways
I
to
don't want to
lead.
be a manager.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to lead, and I also think we should be real. And I'll just make this personal to myself. And I know I'm not alone in that. I have a coaching client who is a strategic seller, and she and I were talking about this, and she was like, "Okay, do I go into management? Do I pursue like just stay in strat sales?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know about you, but for me, that is enough. Like, I had to sit down and be real with myself about ego, right?
Yeah.
Because it's hard to watch people that I was peers with, or we've had the same length of career, now have titles like VP, right? Like, that title sounds very, right? And because I am a leader and I am interested in leadership, there are twinges where I've been like, ugh, like, should I do that? Because it feels sometimes like you're not progressing if you stay as an individual contributor. But whenever I was really real with myself, okay, I'm like, okay, well, the title is one thing, but setting the title aside, will I like my life? Will I like that calendar? Will I like how that feels? And I've had people that I respected that had made that leap into management. And so I went and asked them, like, what's the hardest thing? What's the best thing? What do you think? I would say just be very, very real with yourself. Otherwise, you could get into something just based on a title, and you could end up making yourself miserable. And if something just at a gut level doesn't feel right to you, like there's a reason, and you will never regret. I've never regretted not listening. I've never regretted listening to my gut. I've many times regretted not listening to it.
I'm going to ask a selfish question and just see your opinion on it of when you are an IC and you feel like maybe your team is not doing best practices and you're like bringing playbooks, you're bringing in inbounds, you're doing a lot of extra stuff. What is the best way to speak to leadership and not like step on people's toes, or just be like, hey, I got this great idea. I think that if we bring in this tech, or if we start posting on LinkedIn, it's going to be great for us.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, just posting it not as like, hey, look at this great thing I'm doing, but like, here's how it could benefit the team,
Mm-hmm.
right? And here's why. And and I've been doing it for X, Y, and here's what I found. And the other thing is having somebody else present what you are doing, right? So if somebody else says, hey, well, I've noticed, and people can agree with each other ahead of time, like, well, I'm going to highlight your achievement in this, and you, when it's natural, bring out my achievement in this, because it's more powerful, right? When somebody else says, like, this is amazing what they're doing, like, sometimes that is more powerful. So there's lots of ways to, like, and if you're in a large organization or a super political organization, even if it's not large, like, there are people that have more power and influence than others, right? And if you know, like, this person carries a lot of weight in this organization or with this team, and they mention that they think what you're doing is a good idea, sometimes all of a sudden that's enough to make it,
Yeah.
a good idea.
So I think this is like an interesting segue into multi-threading, kind of related, which is sort of
It
the
is.
personas and the personalities and the roles. So you have a masterclass on P Club right now on the topic of multi-threading. This is a topic that we've covered on the show in the past. It's kind of a niche topic, although I think to your point, we were talking offline that there's a lot of opportunity for anyone, regardless of what you sell, to be considering this art form of multi-threading. But maybe start by telling us like what that is, and if you can share anything that would be a great takeaway for our listeners on how to execute on some multi-threading in their current deals.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something we talk about a lot in tech, but
Yeah.
even if you're, I mean, even if I had a friend in Austin who he sold for Caterpillar, like the giant tractors, right?
Nice.
So if you're a highway contractor and you're going to purchase 10 Caterpillars, like, there is not probably just one person who's responsible for that multi-million-dollar decision. If you don't have to be selling tech, you can be selling tractors. And so it's just the understanding. I think Gartner talks about, like, in a typical B2B purchase, there's like 6 to 12 people that are going to influence in a deal on average, depending on, depending on lots of things. But they're, in the 50s, and maybe, I guess, maybe the 80s. I don't know. Like there used to be maybe one person that could sign something. And now with how risky it is to spend money and people having visibility into how that money got spent and all the metrics that surrounded that, like people don't want to be the only name attached to something, right? And regardless of what you're selling, most of the time, it like even if you just have 2 buyers in an organization, right? I was just talking with the founder who's a client that he generally speaks with a president of a company and the CEO or like the head of the board, but like he has 2 buyers, but it's still not just one. So multi-threading is just having a direct line of communication with with anyone who influences that deal. And it can be, and I want to point out that it doesn't have to be just us having that. I didn't say our single line of communication. Many times it's more powerful if executives align with other executives, right? Because if our execs talk to their execs, because execs speak their own language, they're going to be more candid with each other than if a rep is in on that conversation. Whenever if it's large tech or something large and technical, like I had, my husband used to work for Verizon and he sold very large deals at Verizon. And he had a technical counterpart. And so his technical counterpart would go in and he would work with their technical folks. And like that, his technical counterpart was definitely in a sales role, just like an SC or an SE is in tech, right? So you can align people with similar titles, similar job functions. It doesn't have to be just us, but the more people that you can help and influence and understand that are part of that buying decision, the more likely that buying decision is going to go your way.
Yeah. This is a skill set that I've honed in on. And I think, by the way, just something to call out, this is even more important in the last 18 months if you're selling B2B, because in my experience, so a few years ago, I was doing pretty much the same type of deals that I do now, but it was just a lot easier because maybe there was like, to your point earlier, 2 or 3 people that had to sign off on it. I was on a call yesterday where there were 8 executives on the meeting that all had a stake in this conversation. Apparently this is not like a $10 million deal or anything like that. You'd think if 8 execs are getting up out of bed and joining a call, then it's probably a pretty big deal. It's not relatively speaking. It's not anything that's life-changing or anything that's like earth-shattering. So it's just, in my opinion, sort of a sign of the current state of things, which is, as you said earlier, everyone's trying to cover their ass. I know you didn't put it that way. I'm putting it that way. Like everyone wants to cover their ass. Nobody wants to be the standalone decision maker that it has something blows up in their face. So as such, they're bringing in their peers on the executive team and the tech teams. I think if you're selling something enterprise today, you have to learn how to understand IT buyers. You have to learn how to understand who the executive sponsors, plural in this case. I think that's happening more and more where it's not just the unit leader, but a lot of times the finance leader has to be involved too. IT leader has to be involved. In a lot of cases, there's a whole sourcing department. The procurement department is, fortunately and unfortunately more involved in some of these conversations.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times I had a call recently where they brought in an outside advisor to listen to our presentation, which was just a totally random wild card person that we had no idea was going to join. And suddenly it was like, hey, this person is an advisor. She's here to just give us her kind of unbiased thoughts on what she's going to see today, which was just, it's hard to prepare for that because it's such a black swan. Like, oh, suddenly there's this advisor on. We have no context or we don't know what lens they're looking at our product through. And so it's a lot, but I think you referenced this earlier too, which is it's also just really important because if you have one of these people depart from the company or you have someone who's maybe a detractor, but you have 3 champions that are pushing against the detractor, that can help you win the deal too. So it's very complex out there right now, but that's why I think this skill set and this masterclass you're doing are especially important in 2024.
Yeah. I, like you, had like in 2020, late 2023, Q4, I had 2 deals that were low 5-figure deals where CFOs were involved. And I was like, you have got to be shitting me. Like, I was like, we are getting a CFO. Like, if y'all need a CFO to sign off on this level of deal, like, your company is in more trouble than you can possibly imagine. Like, it's just like, it's crazy. So yeah, so definitely in tech, because the money is dried up, and it used to be just like growth at all costs. And now it is like efficiency at all costs. And now all of a sudden we have this wild idea that companies like need to be cash flow positive. So,
Really?
right? Like they need to make money. So yeah, it is definitely changed a lot. But whether you're, again, it doesn't matter. Like in tech, it's been especially a very fine point put on it in the last couple of years. But the thing, like, when you look at the data around multi-threading, it increases if you are multi-threaded with like at least 5 people, like the odds of you closing that deal are like 5x to 25x greater. Like it's a crazy high number. But and I think sellers have for a long time been like, oh, well, I really should multi-thread because it leads to higher win rates, which it does. But that's like surface level. What's even more powerful is understanding why that is, which is like what you said. Like people don't want to be the only ass on the line, right? In the Jolt effect, which is from Challenger, and they talk about like how you don't lose to the status quo, right? And like when what they talk about is the status quo might be a big problem, right? There's pain there, but there's no one person's name probably that's associated with that pain. It's just this thing sucks, right? Or this thing is losing us money or whatever. Versus if you have someone that attaches their name to an initiative to fix that pain, and that thing fails, now their singular name is attached to the problem. That's very, very risky. Versus if you have, multiple people, even if you're a VP, you don't want to go to a CFO alone. If you've got 4 other VPs who all agree, or in your case, 8, like that makes it feel better, right? And it also feels less risky to the CFO. They're like, well, if 8 of my VPs, which it's hard to get them to agree probably on a lunch order, but if they're agreeing on like buying this, like it is a lot less risky. I think it's McKinsey and Forbes have talked about that it's like 70% of change initiatives fail, right? So it's a wonder that people want to pursue safety in numbers. So if you understand and you approach it with your champion from that lens, like I want to make this the least risky for you. It will be less risky if IT also agrees this is a good idea. It will be less risky, and typically also marketing is involved, or HR, or operation, because they're also effective. Your primary buyer is probably not thinking through the other downstream or like ripple effects. So the more you can help them understand that, the more they're going to help you multi-thread the org because it benefits them, right? Like we shouldn't hesitate to ask about that. We should lead with that, because a true champion that wants to get something done, wants to be led. You are an expert in how to buy your thing. They are an expert in how to do their job. And so if you can lead them by telling them who typically gets involved and what typically happens next, the deal will go faster. It will close larger. You won't get ghosted as much. There's so many benefits.
So I'm realizing we are coming up on time. This is super interesting. We may need to have another episode as a follow-up, or people should just go check out your course on P Club.
Or do a direct coaching call.
Or a direct coaching call with Krysten.
All of that. Any of that.
Just in closing, I guess, if you could somehow sum it up in one piece of advice for a seller out there who's trying to get their craft down for multi-threading, is there any one piece of advice for getting started or for mastering the art of? I know it's probably really hard to boil down to one thing.
It is, but let me take a crack at it. And I would say if you understand this one thing, that everything about multi-threading kind of follows from there. Sales is always about what's in it for me. Always. And so what kind of waterfalls or trickles down from there is generally there's going to be at least 3 departments that are involved in buying your thing. And if you're in tech, IT is going to be one of them. Like they have to vet it to make sure, they have to bless it to make sure all the trains are still going to run on time. So there's IT, and then there's 2 to 3 more. And then after, so you have the departments, let's just say 3 departments, and then you have 3 layers in each department. You have executives who care about, does this thing help me reduce risk or win or accomplish an initiative? If you're selling software, they will never log into that software. They'll see reporting from it, but they're never going to log into it. If you're selling tractors, they will never sit on that tractor, but they'll see, can we, get more jobs because we can do them faster? Like they will be affected by it. Then the middle level is managers, and then the lowest level is end users. And end users care about only one thing. Does this make my life easier or harder? Is this tractor easier to use? Can I do my paving job faster? Right? Does it cause less injury? Right? If my back isn't jarred by it, right? Managers care about, does this make life easier, better for my team? That's what they care about. And so when you think about, if you put on always the lens of what's in it for me, you need to answer that question for each department and each layer of that department. And that's why it matters that you're single threaded, because all of them care about different things. Yeah. And if you message an executive with a function that an end user cares about, you will instantly lose them. And if you talk with an end user about how it's going to help the company reduce risk, third-party risk, and increase their market share, they might, that might give them a warm fuzzy, but chances are they don't give a shit. Like they care about what their day-to-day lives are. And so if you just think about what's in like even the reducing the risk, right? Like it makes it less risky for them to ask for budget whenever there are multiple VPs asking. All flows from what's in it for me. And so like if you can just put that lens on, you will make everything about a sales job easier.
That was actually a great way in one point to sum up threading, is find out what's in it for them and on the individual basis across all the threads. That's actually a great takeaway for anyone listening. Well,
the teaching background give you is the power of summation and simplifying, right?
It's
brilliant.
And I'll also put a plug. The P Club, the way that she does just the modules, it's not like some long lecture. It's very bite-sized and easy to digest. And that's really what I love about P Club. Also, I'm sure your other courses, they're not like lectures. You can just drill through them and really learn. So I want to challenge everybody to take a look at P Club and also connect with Krysten online on LinkedIn. Really.
Thanks for that plug. That was the goal, right? It's like to make it digestible, to make it usable, to make there be like plug and play things. And also from a teaching background, to make it easy for you to instantly apply what you're using. Because if you don't instantly use it, it's just gone, right? It just flies out of our heads despite all of our good intentions. And that's what's been frustrating about a lot that's been, sales books or whatever that's on the market. Like it's a great high level idea, but you don't necessarily get a lot of great takeaways on how you will actually use it tomorrow. And so that's the idea.
Amazing. Well, Krysten, thank you for coming on. Where can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to message you directly?
Yeah. So I'm around on LinkedIn. And then also if they're interested in coaching or just kind of understanding more about that or training for their team, my website is KrystenConner.com, but that link is on LinkedIn. So they can go and find that and find me that way. I appreciate y'all having me. This has been a fun conversation.
Appreciate
awesome.
you.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.